What? Where's the madam?
What you doing? He's running her over! He's running her over!
She was 32 years old. She had spent the night getting ready, posting videos of herself dressed up and glowing, the way people do when they are excited about where they are going. She had a following of 275,000 people who watched her life in curated, beautiful fragments. She was a model, an influencer, a Polish-born woman who had built something real in England out of nothing but her image and her drive. And on the morning of April 25, 2026, 6 days after a black Mercedes mounted a pavement in Soho and pinned her underneath it, Klaudia Zakrzewska died. She never woke up. The moment her death was confirmed, the Metropolitan Police released a statement. They expressed their deepest sympathies to Klaudia's family and friends. And then, quietly but with enormous consequence, the charge against the woman already in custody was upgraded. It was no longer attempted murder. It was murder. And now, instead of a case about a woman who nearly died on a London street at 4:30 in the morning, this became a case about a woman who did. This is the full story, who Klaudia was, who Gabrielle Carrington was, what had been building between them for months, what happened outside the Inca nightclub on Argyle Street. And the one detail that hangs over every other detail in this case like a warning that nobody acted on in time. Hours before the incident, Gabrielle Carrington posted a message to her Snapchat story. She said that if someone provoked her and she hurt them, she would not be going to jail. She said she would be at the hospital, around the way from where she would put them. She posted that hours before, and then she got in her car. Stay with this all the way through. Because this case is not just about two women and a feud that went too far. It is about what happens when rage is announced in advance and nobody takes it seriously until it is too late. It is about the industry that surrounded both of these women and the dynamics it created. And it is about the questions we need to be willing to ask, uncomfortable as they are, about every person and every system that touched this story before Klaudia ended up under that car. Klaudia Zakrzewska was born in Poland and built her life in England. She was 32 years old and had grown a following of 275,000 people on Instagram, where she posted fashion, travel, and lifestyle content. The kind of page that looks effortless from the outside and takes enormous discipline to maintain. Before she went out on the night of April 18th, she posted videos of herself getting ready, dressed up, happy. The way people document the beginning of a good night without any knowledge that it will be the last one they ever have. Those videos were still sitting on her profile when her mother was pleading with strangers on social media to pray for her daughter to survive. But here is the first question this case demands we sit with. And I want to ask it carefully, not to assign blame to Klaudia, but because it matters. People close to Klaudia have said publicly that the hostility between her and Carrington had been building for months. Not days, months. One of Klaudia's friends described Carrington as having a pattern of needing to confront and dominate. She described the tension as something that had escalated well before that April night. She said it should serve as a warning to people about protecting themselves from envy and aggression. So the question is this. If the people around Klaudia knew the key of this conflict, knew it had been escalating, knew that Carrington's energy toward her was not simply social media friction, but something more threatening, what conversations were being had about that? What steps, if any, were being taken to keep Klaudia safe? And what does it say about how women in these social spaces normalize danger until it becomes impossible to normalize any further? I am not asking those questions to suggest Claudia did anything wrong. She did not. She had every right to go out. She had every right to exist in the same city, the same nightlife, the same industry as Gabrielle Carrington without fearing for her life. But those questions matter, because understanding how threats build and how they are or are not taken seriously is how we prevent the next one. Gabrielle Carrington was 29 years old with 368,000 followers, a larger audience than Claudia's, built on the same kind of content: fashion, travel, a curated window into a life that looked good from every angle. She had a different origin story to most influencers. In 2013, she appeared on Series 10 of The X Factor as part of a three-piece girl group called Miss Dynamics. The group made it to week 10 before being eliminated. Most people assumed that would be the end of her moment. Instead, she rebuilt social media, a small film role in 2019, a growing platform. By 2026, she was a legitimate influencer with the kind of following brands pay significant money to reach. And here is where we need to ask a difficult question about Carrington before we reach April 19th. The Snapchat post she sent hours before the incident was not subtle, it was specific. It described a scenario in which she hurt someone for provoking her and said she would not be going to jail, but would be at the hospital around the way from where she put them. Those words were visible to anyone who followed her on Snapchat. They were time-stamped, they were recorded. Who saw that post before the night ended? Because here is what unsettles me about it. In 2026, with the level of public scrutiny both of these women operated under, with followings in the hundreds of thousands and an ongoing feud that had been discussed in online forums and among mutual contacts for months. How does a post like that exist for hours without anyone in Carrington's circle saying something? Without anyone picking up a phone and calling her, or calling someone who could reach her, or alerting anyone that the situation might be escalating toward something physical? The post was not a private thought. It was a statement sent to an audience, and the question of what that audience did with it, or failed to do with it, is one that this case has not yet fully answered. Was this someone who had posted similar things before, and nobody took it seriously because that was just how she talked? Was this a pattern that people around her had normalized because it had never resulted in serious consequences before? And if so, what does that tell us about the environments these women inhabited and the degree to which even when it is stated plainly and publicly, is absorbed into the noise of influencer culture until it is no longer treated as a warning? The tension between these two women is described publicly as having begun with Claudia unfollowing Gabrielle on Instagram. In the influencer world, that is not a neutral act. It is visible, it is noticed, and it carries meaning. But it is also, by any objective measure, an extraordinarily small thing. The kind of small thing that in most contexts would result in nothing more than mutual awkwardness at industry events. But this did not stay small, and that is the part worth examining. Because the question of how a social media unfollow becomes a feud that becomes a death is not just a question about two specific women. It is a question about what the influencer industry does to people, what it rewards and what it punishes. What happens when your income, your identity, your sense of worth in the world are all tied to a metric that goes up when conflict generates attention? Some accounts suggested the two women were in competition for overlapping brand deals. Others pointed to a romantic rivalry involving a married man with a newborn. Others described it as a broader pattern of Carrington, conflicting with multiple people for different reasons. The truth is probably a combination of all of those things and more, which is itself a comment on how complex and layered these situations are by the time they become violent. What we can say with confidence is this: the industry, both women worked in profits from conflict. Engagement goes up when drama goes up. Follower counts rise when someone says something that makes their audience pick a side. The algorithm does not reward peace, it rewards heat. And two women in the same space, competing for the same eyeballs and the same brand budgets, had every structural incentive to generate exactly the kind of hostility that ended with one of them dead and the other in custody. I'm not saying the influencer industry killed Claudia Zakrzewska. I am saying the environment these women were in did not create the conditions for this conflict to de-escalate. And that is a conversation worth having beyond this one case. Argyle Street, 4:30 in the morning. The Inca nightclub sits on Argyle Street in Soho, a short walk from the London Palladium. On the night of April 18th going into the early hours of April 19th, both women were there. At some point in those early morning hours, they ended up outside the club at the same time. CCTV footage reviewed by investigators showed Carrington had arrived in her car and had already been involved in a confrontation with a male as she exited the vehicle. Club security tried to intervene. The situation on the street involved multiple people. And then, as the immediate confrontation appeared to be winding down, Carrington walked back to her car and got in. Here is where the action taken matters enormously. By this point in the night, there were bystanders present. Security was present. The confrontation had been visible and physical and loud enough that people had gathered. And in the moments before the car moved, a voice in the bystander footage can already be heard shouting, "Do not run her over." Someone saw what was about to happen. Someone registered that the person behind that wheel was a threat, and then it happened anyway. Why was nobody able to physically prevent her from getting back into that car? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a genuine one about the practical limits of intervention in moments of rapid escalation. People were there. The warning was shouted, and the car still mounted the pavement. Prosecutor Rizwana Amin described what the footage shows in precise terms. The vehicle moved sharply onto the pavement. It struck Claudia Zakrzewska, who was positioned at the front side of the vehicle. She was dragged forward and dropped between the car and a metal bike rack. The vehicle kept moving. It took her fully underneath, then it reversed, back over her. And after that, according to the prosecution, Carrington got out of the vehicle and attempted to approach Claudia as she lay seriously injured on the pavement. That detail is worth sitting with. After everything that had just happened, she got out and tried to go to her. What was she thinking in that moment? Was it horror at what she had done? Was it something else? We do not know. But the action raises questions that the trial will need to address. Anouch Chechi, a 56-year-old security guard doing his job in the area that night, was also struck as he tried to move his e-scooter clear of the chaos. He now has life-changing injuries from a night that had nothing to do with him. He made a decision to try to get out of the way and paid for it permanently. That deserves to be said plainly. He was an innocent bystander doing the right thing, and his life was altered regardless. A third woman, Letitia Armstrong, was also injured and later discharged. Emergency services arrived to a scene of chaos. Claudia was extracted from beneath the vehicle. She was rushed to hospital in a life-threatening condition. Gabrielle Carrington did not flee. She was arrested at the scene. And here is a question about that action too. She stayed. She did not run. In cases where someone flees the scene, it is often interpreted as consciousness of guilt. But staying also raises its own questions. Did she genuinely not anticipate the severity of what had happened? Did she believe she could explain it? Was the alcohol affecting her understanding of the situation? All of that will be examined. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was overwhelming from the moment officers arrived. There was bystander footage from multiple phones. There was CCTV from multiple angles above the street. There was the Snapchat post, time-stamped hours before the incident, which prosecutors are presenting as evidence of intent rather than impulse. And there was the toxicology result. Carrington tested at 61 micrograms of alcohol per 100 milliliters of breath. The legal limit in England is 35. She was nearly twice the legal limit. So we have to ask this too. If she was that far over the limit at the time of her arrest, what was she doing behind the wheel in the first place? And who, if anyone, knew she was planning to drive that night? Driving under the influence is not a decision that happens in isolation. It happens in a context, with other people nearby, with other choices that could have been made. By Monday, April 20th, the Crown Prosecution Service announced charges of attempted murder, dangerous driving, driving under the influence, actual bodily harm, and grievous bodily harm. Carrington appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court on Tuesday, April 21st, dressed in gray. She made a heart gesture toward her family in the gallery. She entered no plea. The judge remanded her into custody pending her appearance at the Old Bailey on May 19th. 6 days later, Claudia Zakrajewska died. The charge became murder. And everything this case will now be decided on at the Old Bailey before a jury with the full weight of English law is whether Gabrielle Carrington intended to kill her or cause her grievous bodily harm. The Snapchat post says she warned the world she might. The question the jury will answer is whether she meant to. English murder law requires the prosecution to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant intended to kill or to cause grievous bodily harm. The defense will almost certainly argue accident, that the alcohol, the chaos, the emotion of the confrontation outside the club produced a catastrophic outcome that was not planned. But the prosecution has things that make that argument very difficult. They have the Snapchat post written in calm, deliberate language hours before, describing almost precisely the scenario that unfolded. They have multiple bystanders who were already shouting, "Do not run her over" before the car moved, suggesting the threat was visible to people on the ground, even if they could not prevent it. They have footage of the car mounting the pavement sharply, not drifting or swerving accidentally, but moving in a specific direction toward a specific person. And they have the evidence of a months-long conflict that the people around both women knew about, and that Carrington had, in her own words on social media, framed as something she was prepared to act violently on. The defense will need to explain all of that, and whether they can will be determined at the Old Bailey by a jury in a case that has no verdict yet and every possible outcome still on the table. Claudia Zakrajewska was 32 years old. She posted videos of herself getting ready and went out for a night that should have been ordinary. She had a mother who called her an angel, her world, her everything, and who spent 6 days asking strangers to pray before the prayers ran out. Anouch Chiichi was 56 years old and working. He is now living with injuries that will never fully resolve. And at the center of it all is a Snapchat post that said, "If I hurt someone for provoking me, I will not be going to jail. I will be at the hospital, around the way from where I put them." The court will decide whether that was a threat or a coincidence. But the questions this case raises about how we treat public displays of aggression, about what the influencer industry does to the people inside it, about who sees a warning and says nothing, about how far a conflict has to go before someone intervenes, those questions belong to all of us, and they do not wait for a verdict. If this one made you think, that is the point. Share it. Subscribe. Leave a comment with the question this case left you sitting with, because the best thing true crime can do is not just tell you what happened. It is make you ask why nobody stopped it sooner. I will see you in the next one.